most casualties in any single battle in the Civil War occurred at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in which 50,000 troops either lost their lives, were wounded, or were missing in action. Now this seems like such a long time ago, but this 20-pound Parrott gun shell actually gives a demonstration of how much it is still fresh in our American history. I'd like to give a brief understanding as to why Gettysburg played such a pivotal role in molding our American history. The first thing I'm going to talk about is what was at stake for both sides, the Confederates and the Union alike. Second thing I'll talk about is how a meaningless battlefield actually turned into a very meaningful battle. And the third thing I'd like to talk about is how the aftermath of the battle helped mold our history into what it is then and now. I'd like to begin by explaining the Union and the Confederates and what was at stake for both sides. Carl Smith said in Gettysburg 1983 that the Confederates needed supplies and food, and they needed support from Europe, the British and the French, in order to continue fighting in the war and have a better chance of winning the war. And they also needed to win a battle on northern soil to help increase morale. Now, their morale was high, and that was because of Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Army of the Northern Virginia. And that's what the Union needed to do, was to increase their morale. They had the supplies and the food, everything taken care of. But they needed to defeat Robert E. Lee in order to show that the rumors of him being invincible were not true and increase the morale in the North. These important keys led to the war in Gettysburg, and it was a very non-strategic battle. They actually met by happenstance in the middle of Gettysburg. Both armies were moving in their directions based on what they had been ordered to do. J. Wirtz and Edwin Bears wrote in the Smithsonian's Great Battles and Battlefields of the Civil War that the Union wanted to actually avoid any combat with the Confederates and move their army into the strategic area in which they wanted to move them. And they had caught wind that the Confederates were actually in the forest nearby Gettysburg. And the generals convened and decided that they needed to engage the Army of the Northern Virginia, which they assumed was based on the numbers of Confederates that they had seen in the forests. As I said before, this was the bloodiest battle, and the Confederates' lack of troops, considering the losses of both sides, caused them to decrease their morale and eventually lose the battle and eventually lose the war. It also allowed the Union to increase their morale and move their army back onto southern soil. The loss of the Confederates at Gettysburg was detrimental, and it also, even though it was detrimental to the Confederates, it actually brought a unification to the country. And even more so, Abraham Lincoln, who's one of the most famous presidents in our history, gave one of the most famous speeches in our history, and that was the Gettysburg Address. And here's the original draft of the Gettysburg Address, drafted in the Executive Mansion by Abraham Lincoln. And the reason I'm talking about this is because the Gettysburg Address was a very influential, and this was by Jack McLaughlin, and it's called the Gettysburg Long and Cap. And the reason I'd like to talk about this is because the Gettysburg Address was such a huge catalyst in unifying the country. It brought homage to the troops that had fallen in battle there, and basically what Abraham explained in the speech is that he didn't want their deaths to be in vain, but to be a start to a new government and the joining of the country and a union. And instead of being more state-oriented government, to have a more centralized government in which everything was done more federally and as a group. And that idea has passed through 250 years, and it's still utilized today in the Democrats and the Republican parties. You still have that unification, even though there's two sides. It's all done in a meaningful way in which, you know, Abraham Lincoln's speech resonates in the way we practice our politics today. And we carry that memory in our hearts, and it shows. So, to conclude, I'd like to say I explained what was at stake for the Union and the Confederates going to Gettysburg. I explained how it became such a meaningful battle, and I also explained how it led to unification in the aftermath and how it's led to where our government is today. And I hope I've given you a brief understanding as to how Gettysburg has molded our American history into what it is today. And to conclude, I'd just like to say, you know, this is a tour guide at Gettysburg. And on the back, they actually do have a drafted copy of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So even when you go there today and visit Gettysburg, you really get a true understanding of how important this battle was to our American history. And it's almost as if you can see the battles occur in front of you if you ever have a chance to visit there. So, thank you very much.
Little golf clap.
Oh yeah.